All right, today we are diving into something truly fascinating. It's a political commentary from a figure who calls himself Dr. Roots. And let me tell you, it presents a worldview that you've probably never encountered before. So let's just jump right in.
Right out of the gate, he hits you with this. The chains of 500 years are breaking. Africa is rising, and Trump is helping us rise. I mean, wow, that one statement just lays it all out, doesn't it? It sets the entire tone for this commentary and tells you right away that we're heading into some really unconventional territory.
Okay, so to really get a handle on this, we're going to break it down into 6 parts. First, we'll look at the manifesto and who this author actually is. Then, we'll explore the surprising link between Africa First and America First. After that, we'll dive into his case against President Obama using Libya as a key example. Then there's this really controversial take on Liberia's history, and we'll wrap it all up with his final call to action. All right, first up, the Dr. Roots Manifesto. Let's figure out who is actually writing this. So who is this Dr. Roots guy? Well, according to the document, he wears a few different hats. He's the founder and president of Immigrants for Trump. He's also the general secretary of the Africa First political movement. And on top of that, he wrote a book defending President Trump. So right away, you can see this dual focus, right? He's got a foot in U.S. immigrant politics and another in this very particular nationalist vision for Africa.
And that brings us right to the heart of his argument, this idea that Africa First and America First aren't just things that can coexist. He's arguing they're actually natural allies.
The whole foundation of his thinking is this concept he calls Africa First, and he breaks it down into 4 main pillars that are all about achieving sovereignty for the continent. So what are these 4 pillars? Number 1 is economic sovereignty. Basically, he's saying no more taking orders from the IMF or the World Bank. Number 2, political independence. No more foreign meddling. Third is cultural integrity, which is all about pushing back against what he calls imposed Western values. And finally, number 4, continental unity, which is about healing those old colonial divisions.
Okay, so this is the big question, right? How on earth does an African nationalist movement line up with a policy like America First? It really seems like they'd be at odds.
Well, here's his logic. He argues they aren't in conflict at all. In fact, they feed each other. He says that when America adopts an America First policy, it stops trying to be the world's policeman. And that is exactly what Africa needs to actually achieve an Africa First policy. So in his mind, when America stops enforcing globalist hegemony, Africa gets to stop being the global colony. One makes the other possible.
Okay, and this is where the commentary takes a really sharp turn, because now he needs an antagonist for his story, a villain, and for him, that person is President Barack Obama.
And the central claim he makes is, honestly, it's staggering. He puts a number on it. He alleges, and he calls this a conservative estimate, that the policies of Barack Obama are responsible for over 1 million African deaths. That is a massive accusation, and it's absolutely core to everything else he's about to say. So how does he back this up? He lays out this side-by-side comparison. On the Obama side, he lists things like destroyed Libya and droned African villages. Then on the Trump side, he has things like cut USAID funding and started 0 wars in Africa. You can see exactly what he's doing here. He's trying to draw this incredibly stark line in the sand between the 2 presidents. And he sums up that whole comparison with this one really powerful line. He says, Obama used his African face to destroy Africa. President Trump uses his American voice to free Africa. I mean, that one sentence just perfectly captures his entire argument about the 2 men. So to make this case feel more real, he zooms in on one country in particular, Libya. He calls what happened there the unhealed wound, and he lays it squarely at the feet of the Obama administration. He lists out this whole cascade of disasters that he says came directly from the 2011 intervention. He claims it ignored pleas for peace from the African Union, that it unleashed total chaos by removing Gaddafi, which he says led to tens of thousands of deaths, the return of actual slave trades, and a flood of weapons into the whole region that just sparked more and more conflict. And he doesn't stop with Libya. Next, to really drive his point home, he turns to the Liberian Civil War and offers, well, a very controversial reframing of what happened there. This is where he completely flips the script on the accepted history. He takes Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, the Nobel Peace Prize winner, seen by many as this figure of peace, and he paints her as the war's main architect. He calls her the chief architect and even the chief financial backer of the whole thing.
And if she's the architect, What does that make Charles Taylor, the convicted warlord? Well, in this telling, Taylor gets demoted. He's not the mastermind anymore, he's just the foot soldier, the trigger pulled by Sirleaf.
So his whole argument here boils down to this. Sirleaf was the brain, the strategist, who he says was protected by globalists. And Taylor? He was just the trigger, the executor, who was then jailed by those same globalists when they didn't need him anymore. That's the picture he paints.
So after laying out all this, his version of history, he brings it all together for a final call to action. He tells his readers what he wants them to do with this information.
But before we get to the action, you have to know who the enemy is, according to him. He calls it the globalist machine, and he says this machine is made up of a bunch of different parts. The Democrats, the EU, various NGOs, the World Bank, and USAID, all in his view working against African freedom.
And then he takes this big global fight and brings it right down to one single event, a US midterm election. He frames it as this do-or-die moment, not just for America, but for all of Africa. The way he sees it, the election will either put that globalist machine back together or keep it from being repaired.
And he wraps the entire thing up with a slogan that just perfectly connects all the dots. He writes, "Make America great again. Let Africa be great again. This is our movement, this is our moment, this is our liberation." So you see, he's explicitly tying these two nationalist movements together as one big fight for freedom.
So there you have it. We've walked through the key arguments of this really complex and, let's face it, very controversial document. It's a total reimagining of recent history, all built to push a very specific point of view. And that leaves us with one last big question to think about. If a political story like this is a kind of weapon, who is it really aimed at?